Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, and welcome to our webcast on the workforce of the future. I'm Mary Young from the Conference Board, and here at the Conference Board, we know that this topic is absolutely top of mind. Whenever we do research or do a presentation on this topic, it attracts a lot of viewers, as this webcast has today. So we're really glad that you've joined us from around the world. And I'm going to introduce our speakers in a moment, but I want to first give you sense of where we're headed in this webcast, and we will be talking first about what are the critical questions and issues that companies need to face in terms of the workforce of the future, and that includes what's the workforce going to be, and what are the disruptors that companies have to be prepared for in order to transform the workforce, ensuring that people can thrive during this change, and what are companies doing to prepare the workforce for this future. And now let me just tell you about a few of the details about what you need to do to take full advantage of this webcast. So if you're interested in getting continuing education information, you're going to see that on your screen, but essentially there are two really big caveats here. The first is that you need to stay online for the entire webcast. And the second of all, we can only offer this continuing education credit if you stay on for the entire webcast, but I know you want to anyway. And there are three kinds of continuing education credits, and you can see them here on the screen. I'm also going to just mention before we get started, on your screen you'll see some places that where you can download the slides, where you can enlarge the slides, and most importantly, where you can enter your questions. And part of my job here as moderator is to watch that screen and to see your questions and interject them when I think they fit in, or save them to the end. But please don't wait until the end. It'll be better if you do this from the start in real time, because we'll be paying attention. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panel, or have them introduce themselves, and I'll just tell you briefly. I'm Mary Young. I'm Principal Researcher for Human Capital at the Conference Board. And in recent years, my work has been on big data and human capital analytics, data privacy, and digital transformation and its human capital impacts. Now, Conrad, would you just introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, thank you, Mary. My name is Conrad Deiters. I'm a partner at Mercer, and I'm here since 10 years. My role in Mercer is to lead Mercer's global career, in brackets, HR consulting. Within the multinational client group, we take care of our biggest clients, multinationals all over the globe. And prior to that, I actually assumed roles at Siemens as well as in Allianz Group. So that is my quick
Thanks,
introduction.
Conrad. And Julie.
Yeah, hi everyone. Really excited to be here today. My name is Julie Van Waveren. I work also in the multinational client group in Mercer. And what that means specifically is that on a daily basis, I work with companies that are in multi-countries or global, and trying to prepare on how they address for the future of work. I've come from a background as a sociologist, and I'm specialized in leadership development and people strategy. And I've been a little bit around the world working in growth markets and now in North America.
Great. Thanks, Julie. So we're going to get first a very high-level picture of what's changing in the world. And Conrad's going to walk us through what are some of the big picture kinds of trends that we're seeing, and then we'll drill down more about the workforce. So Conrad, would you start there, please?
Yes, thank you, Mary. So if we take a look, this is certainly the introduction. We're going to address workforce for the future, intersection of human and machine. So we're going to cover a lot of the implications, what it means, having, progress on the technology side, and what does that really mean for individuals and the workforce. So you see here two quotes. I don't want to do a deeper dive into the quotes itself, but just put it a little bit more in a broader context. We see the fourth industrial revolution that is talked about already for a couple of years, probably 5 years or so, and it will have, and it already has, an impact on the businesses as well as on society. Every day we are facing new breakthroughs in terms of technologies. New technologies are being invented and brought to the market, which certainly imply, all of that implies an impact on human capital. So how do we best prepare for the ongoing shifts we are witnessing these days in technology and its impact on human capital? As Mary outlined, we will have a deeper dive later on during our WebEx webcast today. Let me make one note here, one important element. We see, looking at all of the changes in organizations, we see a lot of resistance to change. There is a hidden dynamic of actively and some way it's also brilliantly done to prevent us from changing, from moving the needle in terms of adjusting, adopting to the required changes. And hopefully we can provide you today with more insights on what needs to be done and looked at. Let's take a look at the following page here. You see actually two areas. The upper elements above the line show the impact of technology in terms of the progress we are making. Actually, where we stand, you can see here, and just hang on a second. And here we go. So we have technology that is already there, and we know already the impact of technology in terms of what currently has. Hang on a second, I just need to see that I find this one. Now, here we go. It's much better. Apologies for that. So we have cloud technology, 3D printing, etc. That is already out there. That has a in the market. And we see at the bottom, the green underlying areas, the multi-generational workforce. We have that already, this kind of knowledge already for years. So we are aware of this. And now we are moving and have moved into big data management, automation, robotics, artificial intelligence is already actually moving along the way, machine learning, etc. The rise of free agents gets us again back into what I mentioned before in terms of societal impact, because free agents, the gig economy, they are no longer employed, which certainly will hit them later because they are out of any social security systems. They don't actually enjoy the benefit of being employed anymore, as well as longevity. So this is what we know already. We are moving into the inflection point where the speed of change is going to be accelerated. Blockchain, we know already about. Predictive analytics is already coming stronger our way, not only from an HR management perspective, but also certainly from a customer perspective. Machines, robots that can actually forecast behaviors, which actually gets us further to the right-hand side, where artificial intelligence will actually anticipate needs, not only from an employee's perspective, but also from a customer perspective. In the end, it's going to be an augmented humanity, meaning the collaboration of the human with digital. So that is where we are heading to, and the acceleration you see at the bottom of this slide, we see a stronger pace. Hence, if we look at transformation that we did in the past, we have to prepare during a transformation already for the next transformation. We cannot stay tuned and wait up until the next cycle is going to come. So we always have to stay agile. This is more or less the key message here. Rise of individuals and personas, we will have a deeper dive into this area in the future discussions a couple of pages further out. But this is just a kind of a high-level overview on the acceleration of speed, from now on. On this slide, you actually see the implication on the workforce and the drivers. So we see on the left-hand side the implications on labor demand. The digital revolution actually will unfold an impact of 80% of jobs. That doesn't necessarily mean 80% of jobs will be made redundant, but there will be an impact on the jobs, and we're going to talk about that a little later. Innovation at the core. You know, this is always, whenever we talk to business leaders, sometimes if you talk to business leaders, for instance, in the digital area, technology area, they talk about innovation cycles of 3 months to 6 months. But on average, innovation cycles, product life cycles, will be on average 1 year. That gives you actually from 2020 onwards the speed of change going forward. And that certainly has always an impact on the skills and the workforce. Consumer hybrids, the hybrid consumers, you know, in the past, consumers loved high value. They were prepared to pay a certain price to get a high value. However, given all of the changes in terms of technology in the digital market area, you know, people can compare. Competition is getting higher, and hence they are probably no longer prepared to pay a high value, high cost for a good service. So hence, meaning is here, competition is getting stronger, and you need certainly people who are able to deal with that. So what is this telling us? We have digital tools that help us from a workforce perspective to improve working conditions, because we also have to give the workforce access to that. We need flexibility in terms of our organizational model. We need simplification at all levels in terms of client experience. So really simple, easy to access straight away. And there is a new and rapidly developing change in terms of the skill sets in the workforce we need to account for, we need to get prepared for. And we see a lot of collapse in terms of middle management. That goes back to the organization, agile organization, middle management going further and further away. If you look at the labor supply on the right-hand side, we have the emergence of certainly millennials. And you see numbers, some numbers here, 50% of the workforce in the future, as from 2020 onwards, will be millennials. On the other hand, we see aging societies, you know, average age 44 years, probably not so much in younger countries, areas in the world where we know that the average age will be lower, but you see on average globally, it's going to be 44 years, as from 2030 onwards. And we see the talent immigration from you know, countries like China and India, 40%, that will be moved, will have to be moved in our markets because of the lack of graduates coming from requisite universities. And what does that tell us? We have a global competition to attract and recruit the best talent. We have a multi-generational workforce. We have to deal with distinct career expectation. We have to attract and retain millennials at the end of the day, because there will be representing 50% of the workforce. And we need to adapt to the new work environment to really fit senior population needs. Now moving on. Here you have actually a nice summary on the workforce and its changes. The changes that we see going back to analytics and studies that we do with Oxford and some other institutions, you see the impact of automation on the left-hand side. If you look at 100% of the workforce today, 55% are at present not so much impacted by automation, but 45% of jobs can be automated. That does not mean, as I mentioned before, each and every job will be made, or each and every person will be made redundant. You see in the middle the orange box, that is our estimation that 10% of jobs will definitely be threatened, which gets you into already by 2025 a lower workforce. demand, if you will. The need is lower. You can cover the same kind of activities and work with lower FTEs. However, on the right-hand side, I think this is the interesting part here as to how the skill set, the skill profile of the workforce in demand is going to change from, expertise, relational and transactional. And you see the percentages here on the left-hand side as to how this actually will change by 2025. So there is much more expertise required, much more relational, because this cannot be covered by machines, by computers, by robots, and transactional is there at the top. However, on the right-hand side, you can see the split, the differentiation between the internal workforce and the contingent workforce. As I talked about it already before, we see the change, a massive change in the talent ecosystem. Companies need to really revert also to the outside workforce that is working on projects, on really company-related tasks. And we see a massive change, walking away from having one workforce globally. I know that many of you have already subcontractors in place, but we see a further evolution in that area. To close with this, let's say, introduction, we see actually three key shifts. Number one is the unbundling of work from jobs. So jobs will not longer be jobs, full-time jobs, but jobs will be segmented. Elements will be taken out and redistributed between humans and machines. We've seen that on the second last page. Depending on who's best suited for the job. Does not necessarily mean that humans will be made redundant. They will be needed to actually conduct other jobs. And this is gets us into area 2, where new technologies that are emerging require new roles. And you see that stated here, to design, develop, and maintain the systems that have been created in order to automate parts of the job. And lastly, on the right-hand side, there's going to be a much higher cognitive complexity of human work in order to combine what humans can do and deliver, not only from a cognitive perspective, but also from an emotive perspective, to really deal with the upcoming complexity in the area of digitization. So this gets into the next stage.
Before we go to our slide, I just want to say, Konrad, I think that's a really great overview of the dramatic changes in the business environment. And I want to underscore the importance of that. We always say about HR people, you need to have business acumen, you need to talk like a business person. But what's really dramatic today is that business leaders themselves are having to learn about the impacts of digital transformation. And so they too are starting, they're sort of beginners at this. And I think it gives an unprecedented opportunity for HR people to kind of learn and sync with business leaders collaboratively rather than playing catch up. But the kind of big picture forces that you've just described, I think really clearly, are really important. How the heck can you ever do your job if you don't understand the dynamism of what's changing? So I'm so glad we started there with this presentation, because it's really important. Okay, Julie, you want to walk us through our audience poll question, please?
Sure. So we wanted it open now to hearing your voice on this. So if we hear about the mega trend, the impact on jobs, on skills, on the organizations, and the impacts mainly on the future of work, the question would be, what are the impacts for the workforce for the future? So you can see on screen a polling question that we put 5 challenges, people challenges there. And if we can get your perspectives on which of these 5 challenges associated to the future of work you will be focusing in your organizations in 2019, and start getting your input in Or is it preparing for the impact of jobs and skill shortage? Is it the change in mindset and new ways of working? Is it focusing on an intentionally diverse workforce? Are you trying to manage and administer the new talent ecosystem or transforming the organization and HR? So we'll give a couple of seconds to get your perspectives on that. And we are getting some answers that we can see on screen shortly.
Yeah.
So I think we are almost there. Yes, that's great. Yeah. So I think we can broadcast the results now. And it's interesting is of the 5 people challenges, I'm not sure if we are broadcasting the results now and you can see that.
Yes, I believe we are. We can't see them, however.
Okay, perfect. Okay, that's why. Yeah, we can broadcast the results. That would be great. So what I'm seeing is that the number 1 people challenge with a 72% is the change in mindset and new ways of working. So that's interesting. Then we've got transforming the organization and transforming HR, and we'll expand a little bit more on that on this webinar. Then we've got intentionally diverse workforce and preparing for the impact on jobs and skills shortage. Yeah, so what's interesting about this is, I'm not sure if we can see the results.
I think they can.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. So what's interesting is that when we ask organizations about these challenges, the first reaction is there can be 5, but we are working on all of them at the same time. So I think that is part of the HR and business challenge, is how we address all the impacts on disruption and transformation. And of these challenges, how do we address it at the same time as we transform the organization and the business and we transform HR? On the change in mindset and new ways of working, I think that one specifically, we've been hearing a lot of different lenses depending on the industry. No? So if you think, for example, of financial services institutions, the disruption in terms of new competitors as fintechs or blockchain, and trying to attract new talent, making organizations much more digital and technology at the core, and how they're trying to have more innovation or entrepreneurs in those organizations. Or if we think about the pharmaceutical industry and the impact on AI in our research and development, and how we can then transform the organization in a more nimble, agile organization. So there are many things that relate to the change of mindset and new ways of working that we will expand during our presentation today. And the other one that I wanted to touch base with was on the transformation of HR and the organization. And I think that specifically addresses the audience today. And what we've been hearing from our clients is that the business is asking us to help them transform and at a pace that is more rapid than ever before. And we as HR, we are also being transformed and disrupting by technology, by new skill sets, by organizing around new capabilities that are needing. So I think that one is something that ties it all together in terms of these people challenges. But we are hearing it in terms of how do we can have a framework of change and a change readiness perspective that helps us address all these people challenges at the same time and at different maturity levels, no? And we can expand more on
Julie,
that later.
before you jump in, can I just make a comment here? So I think it's interesting. So the managing the new talent ecosystem is not something I think was high on people's lists. And I think this is an important thing for HR leaders to be thinking about, because if you think of Conrad's trends showing the growing use of external talent, whether it's contingent workers or crowdsourcing or partnerships or open innovation or investment in incubators or whatever, these are all forms of sources of talent that the companies haven't used to the extent that they're going to be using them, nor that HR has paid attention to. So if the employee population is going to shrink and the non-employee sources of talent is going to expand, it becomes very important for HR people not to stay focused solely on employees. If they do that, they're going to be cutting themselves a smaller and smaller piece of the pie, and they're going to be losing out on a tremendously significant strategic contribution, which is helping the organization think about all these other kinds of talent. How do you engage them? How to reward them? How do you communicate with them? How do you manage them? And on and on and on. So I just want to, while that has not been, it wasn't high on people's lists, I think it's a really important one for HR leaders to be thinking about.
Yeah, Mary, and that is a good call out. And what I would add to that is that if you think about the different type of challenges associated to the labor and the talent, so for example, that relates also to the shortage of skill sets. It can be either digital, or it can be aging populations, or it can be new data scientists, or it can be new engineering roles. So I find that what we are hearing organizations on that specific challenge is we have to be thinking of skill sets that we can deploy easily and faster for our business to grow in now, currently, and in the near future. And it's also in terms of the ability to borrow talent that in the next 3 to 5 years we might not be imagining today that we will need. So it's bridging the gap between the skill sets. It's bridging the gap of aging populations also, and it's bridging also the gap in terms of what we know that our business needs today and then in the next 2 years, and what we don't foresee that is coming in the next 3 to 5 years, but our skill sets and talent pools that we need to tap quicker. And they're different.
I'm sorry, Joe, I'm just going to say we have a viewer who sent in a comment saying another wrinkle in all this is the kind of restrictions that employers have in the U.S. about using contingent talent. So that's another factor in this strategy.
Yeah.
So can I take this? Can I just comment quick on that? This is Conrad speaking. It's certainly kind of what I'm seeing is what we are seeing is restrictions in terms of labor law, for instance. We have, from a European perspective, I'm based in Germany and I'm doing a lot of business in Europe too. The highest advanced market in Europe, for instance, is the Netherlands, followed by the UK. All of the rest is probably not so much open to source people from the outside. So the contingent workforces typically would be restricted to kind of operational manual work. Whereas in the US, we see this market already existing. We have a partnership with Work Market, and the founder of this company, he tells me he deals with the business, which is not the answer to your question, instead of HR, but that goes back to what you said beforehand, Mary. It's really a call to action also for HR. But again, it is country specific because of legislation.
Yes, and part of the strategy has to be becoming the master of all these idiosyncrasies and figuring out how you get the talent you need based on the local regulations. Julie, we have another question for you from a viewer, and I think this is about your last strategy of transforming the organization and HR. And somebody asks, how much of this transformation is going to be global? That is, teams that will be comprised or operate globally, comprised of global individuals, and how much of it, I guess it maybe I think the last part I don't understand, but maybe it's in comparison to being nationally based, if I understand the question.
Yeah. So it's the global impact on these disruptions. So I'll divide that in two lenses. If we think about the consumers, the business and the consumer, we think that on the trends that, for example, Conrad was sharing, that is a global impact on those mega trends. So if we think about the impact of, for example, technology, or we think about the impact of automation, and we think the impact on consumer changes and needs and how we address those needs and get to the market quicker, we find that that is a global impact, and that will have impact on jobs and skills needed. Now, when we get to the people side of this transformation and the HR transformation of that, what we are hearing, at least from multinational companies, is that to operate multinationally and address that as I would say, as efficiencies, we hear a lot of relocating teams or drawing into teams in different locations in the world where you're tapping to specific talent that you need. So that will be much more global than before. And I would say, lastly, on the people side and on the talent side, there might be some differences in the economies or demographics by regions. Like, for example, if you think about North America and Europe and some Asian companies in terms of aging populations, that might be different to other countries in the world. But that will mean that we will have to tap to talent differently, and that is a global impact. So the answer would be yes. Are these megatrends, these disruptions, and the future work and workforce for the future, do they have a global impact? Our vision is that yes, because in the end, the talent shortage will make the frontiers and the boundaries phase out over time.
And one other question, I think you can work this into what you want to talk about next. But somebody has asked the question: with a growing percentage of contingent workers, gig talent, etc., how do companies build in belonging? Because those things seem to be antithetical. So in your next section, perhaps you can get to that.
Sure, yeah. So that relates nicely to what we were going to share on the human side of this. No? So we've been talking about the disruptions in organizations and job skills, but there's a human component of it. And it's interesting because we run a research every year that is called the Global Talent Trend Study. And what we've learned is that 39% of employees are happy, but they are leaving. And if you think about disruption, that disruption means constant change and adaptation, that it requires people to be really engaged and willing to do that and willing to drive that change. If we think that the requirement for the workforce for the future is having people that are energized, committed with our customers and our clients, that are creative and innovative, that are adaptable and growing, we call it thriving, no? And if we think that only 35% of employees are happy but leaving because you're not thriving, that puts a completely different lens on what should we also be focusing, no? So I think that's the human perspective of it. Now, what have we learned on thriving and on the new workplace and workforce? And if you think about the word thriving, it's interesting that in most of our organizations right now we focus a lot on engagement, no? Which at least we define in Mercer as the psychological investment that people have in their job and in their company. But we think that is a very one-sided and narrow view of the workplace experience and what it would look like in the future of work, no? And it's because that definition on engagement is just the relationship between the employee, the work, and the company. But the engagement surveys, although they try to understand this, they're not tapping into a broader perspective that is on thriving and how we do attract new talent and engage new talent, no? And that is part of our discussion. Now, what is thriving and how has that changed over time? And this is part of the shift that has been happening in our workplace over the, I would say, past 15 years. So when we think about the different psychological contracts or engagement contracts, we come from the loyalty contract that was fulfill all my basic needs. Then we shifted to what we call the engagement contract that is more responding to employees, what we call psychological needs. And now we are in the era of the Thrive content that is give me meaning. Yeah, and so give me a work that has a sense of purpose that I can relate to and that really expands my possibilities and what I can learn over time. So it's a very different notion on job and how it is changing and how the new generations and this multi-generational workforce thinks about what the future of the work would look like and what are the possibilities there. And we like to call out a quote from Robin Chase that we really think that that depicts what the Thrive contract is, and it's, my father had one job in his lifetime. I've had 6 in mine, and my kids will have 6 at the same time. No? So if we embrace this reality, we fundamentally think that it's reshaping what makes work for the coming generations, and how we can do that mindset change in terms of thriving teams, thriving organizations, and having the energy around that for the change that is coming. Now, the other concept, if we think about the human side of it, is that we've been talking as HR for a long time now, in that the one size does not fit all, but that is really true, more true than ever before. No? If we think about the impact on the jobs, on the skills we'll be looking for, and tapping, as Mary, you were saying, to the different talent pools, and in the different formats, gig economy, partnership, crowdsourced talent, etc. And this brings into the picture the concept of what we call the concept of personas, and it is really linking to employees' needs and what makes work for them, and that is tapping into things of understanding the demographics, understanding even location demographics, and what does that mean in terms of prioritization or needs, or specific interest, behaviors, or even communication preferences in terms of what works for these kind of employees. And you can, we are sharing there some of the, I would say, of some of the different populations, no? So it can be sample of personas that we could call strivers, or is it free agents? Are they starters, either managerial at the core? Are they long-term loyal? So it's being able to understand those different type of personas that you have in your organization. How does relate that to the type of personas of talent that you'll be trying to attract and acquire and borrow in your near future organization, and how we can make that transformation of the business and the jobs, the skill sets, and the interest link to bring the human side piece of that story in. No? And maybe to make this more practical, we like to share always the story on James, no? And as an example of what the concept of persona is. And as you can see, James is at the beginning of his career. He's high flying, he's full of energy. He's a young professional with a strong sales background, ambition, and wants to grow very fast. He recently moved into a sales role. He's traveling the length and breadth of the country just to get the teams going and being close to the clients, no? And he is really searching for ways to bring the best self to work, and even be the best self of what he can learn in this type of role and organization for the near future. So if you think that we as organizations could get and we could tap into these kind of analytics and employee information, makes us really power in terms of how we link the story of how disruption is impacting jobs, the skill sets that we need and the skill set gaps, and then putting the people into that picture by matching the skills, matching interests, matching career paths, and investing in how to upskill or reskill the populations in the near future.
Can I ask you a clarifying question here? I think of personas as being sort of archetypes, and that are based on data in this case. But let's say if James is actually an individual, not a prototype, or not an archetype rather, or a persona. How does a company collect information on somebody's needs and interests and communication preferences? And to what extent is that okay to do under growing privacy concerns in terms of personal data?
Yeah. So we're getting a lot of questions around privacy. That is a good one, Mary. So what we have as information today in a company of our employees, the current employees, there's a lot of data and predictive analytics that we can use just to generate some architects, as you were saying, or to classify or segment our organization today and our employees in terms of personas, no? And there's a lot of available information. There's even methodologies as conjoint analysis that we can can draw into perspective of what are the real preferences and interests of each type of population that goes across like any type of characteristic that they might have. So I'll give you an example. It can be that there are some health, we have a population that is worried on health, and that is not specifically the ones that are most aging one. So what we found, for example, is that a company redesigned their health communication to employees and their health practices when it related to specific groups that can be, for example, people that have been impacted by cancer, and that can be someone that is 57 years old or can be 35, So it's tapping into those very specific needs at the right personal and professional moment, and that there's a lot of data that one can tap into of the current employees. And there are other more I would say analytics that we use for populations that company wants to tap into that they're not current employees. And that's very interesting because we've been using information on zip codes, for example, and zip codes can tell us some characteristics of populations in those locations. For example, in the US specifically, a type of skill sets, type of interest of those type of communities. So there's a lot of data out there that we can use that is not personal information, but that can give you, can predict some of the trends and characteristics of certain populations that companies might want to attract, and then link there, for example, or EVP, employee value proposition, or even how it's being called now, the talent value proposition and the individual proposition, more related to those specific populations' needs and interests. So there are different methodologies, and yes, and it can, and we can address the issues of data privacy, but still get information on talent.
Thanks.
Now, we wanted to share a story, and we wanted to start from more on a macro perspective and putting the customer, the employee at the center of what we were saying. And if you think of and we thought of sharing this story around LinkedIn. So I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with this, but LinkedIn runs what they call the where employees in the US want to work for, top company list. So if you think about LinkedIn, it's in a unique position to be able to measure a number of things about employees at work. So, and for the past 2 years, they created and released this index of companies where people most want to work for. And they tap into more than 500 million users, 150 million users specifically that they have in the US. And they come up with key factors to measure this. So, for example, they measure the level of engagement and interaction of each employee with a company, or they measure the job demand advertised by a company, or the extent to which employees stay at a company. So they measure different variables of that. And there are 3 common characteristics that we see of organizations that come at top of the list. The first is that organizations provide cutting-edge, industry-leading, and challenging work experience. So that's the first one. The second one is that they promote workplace diversity as a priority. And the third one is that these companies take genuine interest in the employee health and well-being. So that's the common theme of the companies that come top of the list. Now, in March of this year, 2018, they released the top companies list, and at the top of the right, you can see this one was the first in the list. And it's interesting, and what we think is fascinating is that the LinkedIn top companies list was released in March, and 3 weeks later, the CEO of Amazon released the letter for shareholders. And he's done this once before in his own lifetime in Amazon. And in that shareholders release, he shared his perspective on what makes Amazon unique, what it makes it successful, and what is important in terms of values and focus for leadership. And letter to shareholders opens with an explanation on Amazon career choice, and how this is important to keep on focusing on quality on customers. And what it says is, we fund education in areas that are in high demand and do so regardless of whether those skills are relevant to a career in Amazon. So just think about it, is they fund approximately $12,000 on educational programs that are in high demand or high skill areas. And regardless of the role that you have in Amazon, you can tap into these new learning opportunities or training opportunities, being that related or not directly to the role that they're doing today. But it's about acquiring new skills and new capabilities. What they learned as interesting is that people are, the high demand skill sets of their population is education, health, IT and technology, and even some capabilities on truck drivers. So they have a very diverse population in terms of tapping into new skill sets, but they find that is core of how they want to address the future of their business, the disruption of the consumer and how they're disrupting the business, and also thinking about how to disrupt the HR practices to bridge all these gaps together, or to prepare. I would say more than bridging the gap is really preparing for the future of work.
So Julie, those are some great examples about very concrete HR actions that companies are doing and why they're doing them. How do we put this all into a broader picture again? Conrad, you want to share your Mercer's thinking about that?
Yes, I'm doing that. I'm moving too fast. So this is a roadmap that we created at a very high level to give some kind of guidance as to how to deal with the human digital transformation, based on technology changes. And you see, all starts at the top with the change in business strategy. Each and every corporation is certainly always looking at changes in the market, whether they want to be a disruptor or a follower. They will have to adjust their strategy. This gets them to redesign their business model. You see that on the right-hand side in blue. Also, certainly re-engineering their core processes on the business side in order to provide the requisite services, in order to make customers happy. And this is part of the upper area digital core process design, if you will. So this all starts at the top and comes from the business. And actually, I will present to you afterwards a quite nice case where we helped a company where we have been engaged to really help them to transform. However, next step would be the digital strategy. The company needs to, in order to actually address the business strategy, develops a digital strategy, informing business model core processes as discussed, followed by the human element of that. And this gets us into the court of people, the people management, which starts with the red bubble, target picture, human capital. First thought is certainly workforce planning, but it's really an overall people strategic component of this entire roadmap here, supported on the right-hand side by digital culture and change management. So HR needs to be prepared in order to foster and support the cultural changes and manage the change. And I did at the beginning stress how many people, managers, leaders are resistant to change. So HR is important, an important driver of this change and supporter of this change initiatives. And then we get into digital workforce planning, and this will be a case study I'm gonna talk to you about after this page here. Support the new work as to how people will be working in the future, slice and dice the jobs into different activities conducted either by the outside world, by the contingent workforce, or by the internal workforce. defining digital competencies to make this all work. And from an HR, and now we get to the HR function as such, this requires an adjusted HR strategy to support the target picture on digital human. I mentioned the people strategy to cope with the digital strategy and supporting the business strategy. So this gets us into the HR IT strategy. How digital are we as an HR organization? Can we deal with the internal workforce as well as with the contingent workforce? Do we have HR processes that are suitable? And this goes beyond a Workday or a SuccessFactors implementation. It is much broader, and there was the question around culture. How can we give external workers also kind of access to our culture and systems and processes, etc.? How can we merge all of these kinds of activities? This is embedded here in order to provide the requisite HR services in order to enable the organization to thrive, the workforce to thrive, as well as the individual to thrive. So this gives you hopefully a good outline as to how important the role of HR is going to be looking at the changes.
Conrad, we have a question or a comment, and this is already a pretty complex model, and I know that adding more to it about other functions' role in developing a digital strategy and executing it, making it work, would make this impossibly complex. But somebody has commented on the fact that the growing use of contingent workers raises real challenges in terms of intellectual property. And I'm guessing that there are some other layers to this model that would be legal issues, risk issues, IP issues, et cetera. Is that correct?
Yeah, data security, personal, etc. It's more complex as shown on this one page.
But it does speak to the need for HR to be partnering with other functions, because you can't move to using more flexible talent if there are obstacles that you're not addressing. HR can't make that happen on its own.
No, absolutely, and I would even go further. HR needs to really become, really need to be a integral part of the business, right? Not only other functions, so it needs to understand the business, it needs to understand the changes driven by the digital strategy, and then provide the right answers to that in order to help leaders to get the people they need to have with the right skills in order to be successful in the market.
Now I'm going to try not to interrupt you so you can get a chance to go ahead and do your case study, because I know we're getting some great questions. I'm really glad to get them, but I'll let you go ahead now and talk.
Yes, thank you, Mary. Apologies. So this case study is all about a globally operating financial services company, and financial services has been one of the first industries that has been hit by the disruption in terms of digitization and technology. And also a lot of outside disruptors are out there. We've seen blockchain, etc. And what they did is actually they wanted to really get prepared for the future, not tomorrow, but in the mid and the long run. And the board actually tasked not only HR, but also the CIO and the head of technology to come up with an estimate of the cost. So that was all the kind of the trigger for this bigger project, if you will, they conducted. And it all started out, at the beginning there was just discussions around workforce planning. How do we plan our workforce for the future? HR has been tasked with it. And then it became pretty clear that they need to work together with the business, and in particular with the technology leaders in the business. And 37 people actually, when they started out on this project, from HR, and actually they call, interestingly, HR People and Change. So 37 people from People and Change and from technology got together for a 2-day workshop in order to actually start kind of with some outside-in perspectives, and then they moved further on into design thinking, what the technology changes to the financial services company really means. What does it mean to them? And you can see on this screen, what do we need to have changed, or will have changed by 2023. So that was the starting point. What they did then is really convene with external people, with internal people. I talked about it in order to define the future talent for technology. So that was the first step they wanted to get to. Based on all of the activities conducted during the 2 days workshop, really, focused on design principles of the organization, of the locations, of sourcing, providing value, also actually numbers, financials to it, what the impact is going to be, in order to identify the gaps in terms of location, in terms of skills, always matched against the changes in technology by 2023. What they actually came up with in the end was really a clear understanding of the skills, the people. So it was some kind of a workforce planning activity, but it was really done together with the business. They identified the key enablers in order to prepare a suitable presentation for the board, which included the cost, which included and we're going to see that a very detailed overview on the roles impacted and already recommendations in terms of upskilling, risks and potential mitigation actions as to how they can cope and deal with that. They revisited their talent value proposition. How do we establish a multidisciplinary task force that helps them to get over this and get also attract people that they need to have in the future. And actually, one of the key elements has been a dynamic resource planning. How can we plan the resources that we need internally and externally in the future?
Conrad, we're coming close to the end, and I'm wondering if your slides, the next slides, which have great detail, are ones you could just go through fairly quickly.
Yeah, probably let's take a look at that. So that was the analysis we actually did together with a partner organization by the name of Fathom. You see all of the roles that have been or will be impacted by the progress the technology roadmap actually outlined. And you see credit analysts, and this you easily can spot that this is an enterprise in the banking sector is heavily impacted by digitization, down to executives, secretaries and executives. Digitization of their job will be impacted by below 30%. And you also see at the top right, I need to click one slide further, you also see the impact by location. So you can see that at an aggregated level on the workforce by location, which helps and supports also location decisions, as well as by the individual jobs. And the final slide on this is, and I have to page one further, and here you can see the recommended curricula for those individuals where jobs really will be impacted by the disruption, by digitization. They got an offer as to where and how they can actually upskill themselves, because this is a question CEOs are pretty much concerned about, and we could provide an answer together with the team of the client, which has been very well received.
So it's a great example of using data to deliver insights that can help business leaders make decisions with greater confidence, and really about HR taking a leading role in contributing to those strategic decisions. Yes? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Did I get it right?
Absolutely. No, without data, this project would have gone absolutely in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And this all has been supported by numbers, by financials. What is the impact on how many employees? what are the potential upskilling costs, etc., replacement costs, whatsoever. So this was really based on, analytics, based on certainly outside-in perspectives, based on internal knowledge of existing processes. So it's much broader. It's not only data analytics.
Yes. Yeah.
It all needs to come together.
So, Julie, can you give us a wrap up here?
Sure, I'll give a really quick wrap up because we're almost top of the hour. And it's just coming back to the 5 people challenges or 5 people priorities that we discussed today. So maybe the question would be, has anything risen in your priority list? As we saw, changing mindset and new ways of working came in first, and we had transformed the organization and HR. But it's mostly how these priorities come into play in your organization, in your industry specifically, and how you can, as HR, frame that change and be change ready and transform the organization over time. Just to share some, we have additional material on this. You'll see that in the presentation, so you can tap into it. We're uploading that constantly and with real client or company stories, so you can see what other companies are doing around this. And of course, happy to discuss further. We're really exciting sharing with you all this today, and yes, for sure we can.
Thank you very much. I see you've given us your contact information as well, so I would really like to thank you both. This has been really mind exploding and lots to think about, but I think I'm going to be referring to your slides and actually downloading some of your content as a result of this webcast. So just to wrap up, I want to tell you we have numerous events coming up at the Conference Board. We also have quite a bit of research on digital transformation and its human capital impacts, if that interests you as well. And we have, of course, publications and events. I want to mention that you'll be asked to fill in a very brief survey, an evaluation after this webcast, immediately after. We really pay attention to your answers. We all look at them and we care, and we try to figure out how to be even better the next time around. So please do that. Just share your thoughts with us. And I want to thank you both again for joining us. It's been really a stimulating hour. And thank you all for participating in our webcast and sending in more questions than we had time to get to. But thanks again. Bye-bye.